What's up, everybody, and welcome back to the Pitch Please podcast. Today, we're actually going to be talking about something that I have heard time and time again as a requested topic. We're going to be talking about actually crafting pitches that get you funded or make you successful. This could be for startups, it could be for entrepreneurs. It's really from the elevator pitch to the exit. Obviously, this show started very much with the title Pitch Please, talking to founders and about their businesses and their pitches. And believe me when I say not all pitches are crafted equal. I've heard over 100 pitches over the last 2 years, and there is something to be said about people that get this right. And so to talk about this, I brought on an expert who's going to lend some discussion around this. And so for today, we've got Will. Will, welcome to the show. Why don't you start by telling people, why I picked you and why you have some expertise on this topic?
For sure. Well, thanks for having me, Mike. And I think the reason is, as I was telling you my story beforehand, I have a weird entry into the world of entrepreneurship because I started life as an actor when I was 7 years old. I auditioned for a film, an American feature film in Toronto, and I happened to get it. My first audition ever when I was 7 years old, I got a lead in an American feature film with Anne Bancroft, who was, won the Oscar for The Graduate. And it was this crazy way to start a child acting career with this sort of big decently high profile thing. And so all these, managers from LA were like calling my mom being like, send him down here. We're going to, represent him, because they're always looking for the next, big child star. And luckily my mom was like, no, we're not doing that. So I stayed in Toronto, but I kept working and I kept booking parts and getting TV shows and doing films and stuff. And it just sort of took off. And I was working consistently, got a couple more leads in some TV shows. And then when it came time to kind of pick a career, it was really clear, like, well, I'm going to be an actor. What else would I do? Like, this is going great. So I decided to go to theater school in Montreal. And the year before I graduated high school, my brother passed away in a really horrible accident.
Sorry to hear, man.
Yeah, thank you. And it kind of just threw me off my life track. It's one of those things where you kind of look at your life before and your life after, and of course it messed up my whole family, but I was young. I was 17. And so I started doing a lot of drugs and drinking a lot and trying to like numb the pain and all that stuff. And so when I got to theater school, I just wasn't in a good place. And at theater school, they try to like make you use the like worst things in your life as like fuel for your acting, which I did not appreciate, as you can imagine, at the time. And a lot of kids in my class were going through the same thing. And it just didn't feel good. It wasn't right. They didn't handle us with the proper care, I think. So by the time that was over, I was like, F this. Like, I'm trying not to swear here, but it's like, I don't want to do this anymore, and I need something else, but I'm sort of depressed and miserable. I don't know what I want to do. So I bought a ticket to Spain with a friend of mine and went. And I thought, okay, we're going to get jobs teaching English. And I did. And I realized, I'm actually okay at this, and I like it. And I realized there's a huge parallel between acting and teaching. You're kind of standing up at the front of the room, you're holding attention, you have to keep people's attention. But it was kind of nice. It was more two-way than acting, where it's just you talking to the audience. And then so after doing that, I got asked to be a co-founder in a startup, English education startup in China, which I did for a year and a half. And that was a complete shit show where we made like every mistake under the sun. We had 7 co-founders. We had no shareholders agreement. It was just like a complete shit show.
Cap table disaster. We talked about that a few episodes ago.
Yeah, and we raised 250 from an angel who basically, was just like, yeah, if you
felt sorry for you guys at that point.
Yeah. And yeah, terrible term sheets. And anyways, it was just like the worst kind of business fundamentals, but like an amazing learning experience. Yeah. And so when I came back to Canada, I was like, okay, what do I do next? And I ended up starting a company called OutLoud Speaker School with my old acting mentor, because I saw her working with these students in U of T to help them present themselves and pitch for these like research grants of $2 million. And I just saw that what she was doing with them, with their face and their body and their voice and their word choice and their enunciation and all that sort of stuff that I'd learned at theater school, I was like, I do this with my English students as well. And we're helping them just really use their words and their voice and their stories to affect an audience. And this is the same shit I do as a teacher and as an actor, really. So I was like, there's a business here. So we started a consulting agency, essentially. We trained up a bunch of actors, and we started working with startups pretty much right away. So now I've worked with like Techstars, DMZ, Founder Institute, Google for Startups, kind of like a lot of the big, SaaS or tech accelerators in North America. And we do a lot of corporate stuff as well. Our clients have raised 350 million in investment. That's the number I like to throw around,
Wow.
although obviously we're not responsible for all that. But it's a nice number. And that's like a huge part of our work that we do is we work with startup accelerators. And then also we coach a lot of founders and founding teams one-on-one over these sort of longer course coaching programs, really drilling down on who are you, what's your story, why you, why this, and how do you convey a sense of passion and urgency and competence and adaptability and openness and all the traits that people are looking for to back a founder. How can you effectively show that and when you're speaking? So that's what we do.
That's cool. So you've got this mix of like starting out as an actor and meshing that now, having coached and mentored lots of startups who have obviously raised some significant funding, and hopefully those listening in today are going to learn some of these tricks. Probably one of the areas to start here, and I want to even tie in some of this element that you talked about, where there's like this teaching, and teaching is a two-way dialogue, and pitching and acting is a one-way dialogue. And maybe let's just start there, which is, do you think a pitch is a proper pitch is more like acting or more like teaching?
I would say it's more like teaching, because I think it is a lot more of a conversation, or at least it should be, than people realize. So a lot of time you tell a founder to pitch and they kind of go, like an actor getting ready to do a monologue.
Yeah.
And that's fine if you need to like gather your thoughts, but it should be much more of a conversation. But a conversation where you are the knowledgeable party. You have noticed something in the market. There's a gap and there's something that somebody is missing, and you're filling that in with your startup idea, right? Ideally. So when you're talking to an investor, it should be like a bit of an education. You should be like, hey, check this out. Look at this market. Look at how it's growing. Look at this pain point that a bunch of people have mentioned, and that it's not being addressed properly. Look at all these things I've noticed from this particular group of people who have this problem, and look at this really. And then, of course, when you're talking about your own solution in your own company, you are the expert. This is your shit, And so, yeah, I think it's more like teaching than it is like an acting performance.
So when you break it down, like what are the elements that you consider part of the pitch? Because even as you're speaking about it, I think most people are like, are my slides perfect? Did I use the right words? Did I come up with the right TAM that's going to get someone bought in?
Yeah.
I'm sure that's a piece of it, but there's also this delivery and there's this emotional aspect that I'm hearing in what you're talking about. So when you have to think about the delivery of a pitch, and I'm not just talking just investor pitches. I know that's one piece, but listeners might be doing a presentation at work, pitching a client. When you think about like the concept of a pitch, what are some of the things that you think about or that you see as key components to get right?
Such a great question, and the way you phrase it is something I kind of think about and try to educate on all the time. I have a concept called the powerful pitch, which I take to startup accelerators, or like I'm going to a marketing conference to do this for them. The powerful pitch is basically I show an image, and it's like that speaking emoji of the gray head with like words coming out of its mouth, and then I kind of draw a circle of other emojis, and it's like there's investors on that outside. There are stakeholders, there are potential team members that you would hire and then manage. There are users or customers or clients, however you want to say them. There are strategic partners. There are followers on social media who will make up the kind of top of your funnel as you start telling your story online. There are so many people who you need to speak to as part of your pitch. So for me, the powerful pitch is that flywheel or engine of communication to the outside world, where you're showing your idea and yourself and your personality and your character and your story to get people excited and on board. So the elements to get right about that are pretty much the same in all those situations. You would just change a little bit of your word choice or your story emphasis, depending on if it's an investor or a potential talent that you'd hire. But it should all really be telling the same story, which is there's a group of people who have a problem here. We have something that we think can get them from here to this place they want to be. And this is how that would work. These are all the signals of why it's working already now. And here's my logic about why it will continue to work even better in the future. And here's the kind of person I am and why I believe in this and why I give a shit about this in the first place. And if you're kind of telling all those stories, then those principles should be the same for all of them. So to get more specific, I would say you've got to think about your voice, your face, your body, and your hands as a delivery piece. Is your face telling the same story as your voice, which is telling the same story as your words, which is telling the same story as your body language? If any of those are not matching, human beings tend not to trust you, right? I don't know if you've seen this, Mike. I'm sure you have, but you see a founder get up there and go, we have a really exciting market growing at a rapid rate, and we're super excited about this. And you're just like, well, are you excited? Or
well, they're rehearsing what they've got in the back of their head, and they're just hoping to get it out after that monologue breath that you just mentioned, right?
Yeah, that's right. They're usually what I see from a startup founder pitching their business is I'm saying some things that I've rehearsed because it's my turn to talk. And that's not a good intention for speaking. You need a much better intention than I'm giving my pitch because it's my turn to pitch. That's not a good intention for a public speaker. Your intention should be, I can't wait to tell you all about this thing I love. So it's interesting. I'm so excited. Yeah.
So when you work with startups, I mean, there's a whole bunch here that I want to dig into, which is like the delivery. Which probably is I would say, overlooked thing in many scenarios because people spend so much time on the front part.
Yeah.
But when you're talking about this like storytelling and capturing the emotion, which is one element, and then there's the delivery of how you deliver it. And it's funny, like even as you're talking now, if I were to just go through the last 100 and something recordings we've done, the amount of times I've even seen a hand on the screen, and I've seen your hands and face, and you've come in closer.
Yeah.
It makes a difference. And so I hope, if someone's listening to this in the audio version, tune into the YouTube version or the Spotify version, because you will see the difference in the conversation we're having. But
I like to think of it as two little puppets that are helping you tell your story, like even though you just have this little square.
It also changes the dynamic of the conversation. And it's really funny because if I go, again, back through all last 100 episodes, the variety, I'm the same person. So I am stable across all of these. The difference in the discussions that we have and how they get unlocked is really like a reciprocation of energy. As a host, you can try to create that energy, but if it's not reciprocated, and so I think it comes to a little bit of what you're saying about how do you engage with that audience. How do you frame up because we'll talk about delivery in a second. How do you frame up those right things to build that connection in the initial story that you're going to bring to tell? Like, what are the elements that you need to weave into your deck, if you will? And now I'm using the shadow puppets, but what are the elements of that deck that you need to get right to be able to actually bring it to life when you speak?
So it can be a bit tricky to give to say exactly what slides you need. I mean, I don't know if you've ever seen that infographic that gets shared around Startup LinkedIn every now and again, but it's like all of the major VC funds or accelerators and what their slide deck templates are, what are their must-have slides. And so like Sequoia's is 15, and then like Y Combinator's is like 12, and then like, another one is 8. And then, so it's all of the major players disagree on what slides you need. Most of them agree on the main ones, but they're all right. And they're all based off who did we fund or whatever. But I think what's most important is that the pitch deck, there's some things that just need to be in there. For example, you can't not talk about what you're doing and who it's for. So you need a problem and a customer market who has that problem, and you need to have a solution for them. So that's why problem solutions is just always there. Yeah. And you need to demonstrate some kind of traction, whatever that is. You have to show that you're doing something or you've done something. If you're talking to anyone, you need to demonstrate that you've done some kind of traction. You need to show your market. You need to, and now I say you need to show your business model, but it's amazing how many slide decks I see that don't have their business model. They don't show how they make money. And it's like, that's what this is you're asking for money to make more money, and that you need to show how you're going to make money. So it's hard to, but it's hard to say that you must have like X slides. So I try to just kind of zoom out above that and just look at like, okay, what are key storytelling principles? And a key storytelling principle is you've got to start in an ordinary world. You've got to answer some kind of like call to adventure. You've got to take people, they've got to go on a journey, and then you've got to kind of come home changed. So the arc of your startup should kind of show, here's how things are right now, or here's how things have been. And here's this kind of opportunity for things to be better. And that's where we come in. And if we get to do X, X, and X and this, and already having done a bit of this, and then we go the way we think we're going to go, this is what the future could look like. So all these people who are suffering with this thing here, once getting a hold of us and becoming our customers or whoever, get on board, they'll be part of this great new world here. So you kind of want that arc of a transformation for your customer in your story. And another piece, I know I've talked for a while, but I just want to add this thing. The other piece is your story, what I call the founder story, and how you put that usually at the beginning of the pitch. The founder story is really important to get right because you can also use it in so many different situations. For example, I got on a podcast recently because somebody referred me to a friend. They're like, hey, you should interview Will. And then this person didn't know me. So they're like, hey, Will, just tell me your story or whatever. So I just gave them my story. And it's basically the story I gave you at the beginning of this, which is, this is how I started out my childhood as an actor. Then this really horrible thing happened to me with my brother passing away in the middle of my life. And that knocked me off track. But I found myself as a public speaking coach for entrepreneurs later in life. And now I'm doing something I really love. So I basically told her a version of that. And she ended up sending me something back being like, man, that's such a great story. And then I posted it on LinkedIn being like, this is the story I told. And a bunch of people went, wow, that's so, how did you tell the story? What sort of template did you use? So I started thinking about it. And I've been using this template without thinking about it. And now I've kind of broken it down to childhood origin, youth awakening, and adult choice. So I kind of coach founders to figure that out for themselves, write it down, and then just stick it at the beginning of their pitch as an explanation of why they started this company. So it can just be something like, when I was a kid, I grew up in Nigeria, and my mom worked in the markets there, but she had no way of processing payments, so I really watched her struggle. Then I moved to Canada, and I realized it was really, really difficult for me as an immigrant to get banking solutions. And so when I finally got my education, I started this company that helps small businesses with financial solutions. Something like that. Just something quick, but it's something vulnerable and real, and makes people understand, I see why this person is doing this. And that's super important for you to have as an asset across all your business communications, but just to really know, what is your 3-act story of like you as a child, you as a youth, and then you as an adult choosing to do this? How do you lay that out? And what parts of your life do you choose to focus on?
It's funny because I think even in that same framework, it's sort of how I talked about where and how this podcast came to be with you, which is I started my first job kind of, which was in university as a founder of a business. Then I found myself in big tech working at Microsoft and started dabbling in what could be a startup and realized a lot about myself, which is I actually am not open to taking the risks and sacrifices to go be a startup founder again. But I admire and appreciate the hard work that they're doing. And so I'd love to continue conversations with them and lift those people up that are taking that risk, which is how we got here. And so that story arc is very similar. But the thing that you said that resonated so much, which is I don't know if everyone knows this. They hear it, I think, sometimes. But a lot of the times, investors are investing in you, the founder, maybe more than whatever you've got on your slides. And so it's funny because so many people come on this podcast, and many people have come on and said, Mike, I'm doing this because I need to elevate my brand and help people understand me. Because my first customers, my first investors, the business isn't ready yet. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
They're investing in me. And so as you talk about telling that story and building that authentic connection, I think it's oftentimes the thing that's missed in many pitches.
Totally.
And it sounds like it's the
so
same thing
funny.
you're seeing.
Yeah. And I talked to so many VCs about this, and obviously not every VC is the same, just like not every audience member at different places are the same. But human beings are addicted and completely entranced by stories. They're part of our DNA. It's how we evolved. It's how we shared life-saving information when we were living in tribes, right? So a story is just always going to be the vehicle for an idea. Dan Manning, I don't know if you follow him or are connected with him on LinkedIn. Great storytelling for founders resource. But yeah, he had a post today that was like, the story is the truck, but the message is the cargo. So you're not just telling a story to check, oh, I told a story box. It is the delivery vehicle for your idea, your message. And so you wrap it in a story because that's how human beings take in ideas properly. And so by telling that story in the ways we've been talking about, both telling your story and then connecting it to the larger story of how you're going to change your customers' lives, then the idea that you're pitching is more likely to be received and received favorably when you wrap it in a story. And so connecting the personal story there too, and not just telling the customer story, means that we, as you said, get to know the founder behind the company, because that's what we're investing in, especially early stage. But even later, right? All the time you see these founders who raise a shit ton of money, not because their idea was any good, and it often ends up going tits up, but because the person, they're investing in a founder. Like, you have a track record of getting shit done, I'm going to give you money. I don't even need to see a slide deck. It's like, it's just, here's money.
It's interesting.
Yeah. But I just want to put a point on this, which is just that what you told me too about, I don't have the risk-taking appetite for starting a new venture, but I still really respect. That's a really vulnerable thing you shared. A lot of people wouldn't admit that, or wouldn't want to frame it like that, because maybe it doesn't make them sound as cool or exciting or like relatable to the founders. But you admitted something about yourself that is vulnerable. And when a human being is vulnerable in public, everybody stops what they're doing and watches. And that's really powerful. So I often talk a lot about vulnerability in storytelling. It's like, don't just tell the stories that make you look good. I ask founders to tell their story, and they're like, well, when I was 7, I started a lemonade stand, and that did, $1 million ARR by the time I was 9. And, they're just telling like their resume points, but that's not a story. That's just a self-congratulatory, like, rattling off of your biggest accomplishments.
Yeah, it's so true. So maybe in the same story arc, what are maybe some of the common problems or gaps that you see as a starting point when people are starting to craft their pitch? And then we can talk about solutions against them and actionable things they can do. But let's start with the problems. What are the common problems that you see as a coach in this space?
So, I mean, the typical one that may sound obvious, but it really bears repeating, is people don't understand that their audience doesn't know a fraction of what they know about their problem solution market. You are just the only person who spends as much time thinking about this thing as anyone, as the founder. So when you're talking to an investor, you can't be like, yeah, so, obviously these people have this problem. And yeah, as there's like 21% growth here. Like, none of that stuff should be assumed that people know that. You really have to fight against what they call the curse of knowledge and make shit much more simple. I almost never get people who make things too simple. Once in a while, I'll get a founder who's like, climate change is a problem. And it's like, yeah, we know, you don't have to, like, everybody knows that, but like, in general, people make it too obscure, too dense, and they add too much information, or they speak too quickly about really important points. They run over them. So you really have to put yourself kind of back in a beginner's mindset and like, okay, if I didn't know anything about this, what would I need to hear to get on board? And so that's why having a coach or having a mentor or having even a spouse or whoever that you can say it to and make sure they understand it is such a useful exercise. somebody who's not in the industry, somebody who doesn't know what you know, do they get what you're talking about? So
Got it. So
that's a first problem.
One of the big ones, simplicity. Get the simplicity down. And don't feel like you have to get all of the information that you know out, because they feel like it's like, oh, but if I don't say this point, someone that's looking for that point misses it. Don't worry about that. Make it super simple.
Yeah.
And the other thing you said, you kind of lumped them together, but it's also the speed at which you talk and deliver things. Don't just try to compress more in there.
Yeah.
Spend time telling the story.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sometimes I'll coach founders for like a pitch competition.
What are some of the other things that you're seeing here?
Yeah. Another problem, as I mentioned before, is not telling your personal story at all. I think that's a problem. A lot of people do it, so it's not necessarily seen as a problem because it's standard. But if I don't know why this, I'm just going to have this lingering suspicion about you in the back of my mind. Like, well, what's going to stop you from like jumping ship if you get like, you know, a job offer or a buy? Like, what makes you committed to this? I need to know that, and telling the story is a great way of establishing that. Another storytelling problem is people not connecting different parts of the pitch. So they'll do this. Hi, my company is called this. Our problem is this, blah, 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 blah. The solution is this, blah, 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 blah. Here's our market size, blah, 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 blah. Here's how we make money, blah, blah, blah. There's no logical progression. You should be able to kind of link why each slide is coming afterwards, at least, if not with explicit language, then at least logically. But it's like, okay, so here's the problem here's where I noticed the problem, and here's how the problem affects people, and here's what we can do about it, and here's how many people have that issue. But, you know, in order to capture that much of the market, we're going to need to charge this much to this many people, and in order to do that within this time frame, we're going to need to, you know, grow at this rate, and here's good examples of why we're growing at that rate, because we have this traction so far, and here's why we're the team to capitalize on that traction, because our founding team has this experience, and here's why we need this money to do all the shit I just told you about. Thank you very much. You know what I mean? Like, it should kind of like weave all together like that. So definitely don't start each slide with the problem is, the solution is, our traction is. It's just a terrible way to weave a story together.
Are there also some problems? Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
I was just going to say there's so much more I could talk about, but I would want to hear your question.
No, I think these are interesting parts around the story, but I think when I watch your delivery, and I know that your background is in acting, probably most people's preparation for a pitch stops at, I've crafted my story, I've got great slides, but I have to imagine that there's all these elements on day of that are going to matter.
Yeah.
And maybe it's day of once you're on stage, which, you know, has this resemblance to acting. But is there things that you should be thinking about in terms of what you wear, how you prep yourself for that day, things you do before you take the stage with the audience or at the event? And then when you're on stage, like the how you bring it to life. What are some of the key problems that you think you're seeing there, or things that people just like skip over because it just doesn't seem like they should be thinking about it?
Yeah. So here's an example of how I got into theater school. So I went to National Theater School of Canada. It's very competitive, like thousands of people across the country apply and only 12 get in. So when I was auditioning, I was like, I got to take this shit seriously. I got to really work on my monologues. You get a modern monologue and you get a Shakespearean monologue. I can't even estimate how many hours I worked on these monologues for. And these monologues are over in like 90 seconds, right? And I worked for weeks on these things. And I did all sorts of shit. For my Shakespeare, I would take it when I went swimming. I would recite it in the pool as I was doing my front crawl to help me memorize it and to help me get the emphasis. And in acting, we say that movement helps memory. And so it's when you're walking around on your feet, we talk about getting it up on its feet. And when you have your script, if you want to memorize it more effectively, if you want to integrate it into your body, you've got to get it up on its feet and say it out loud. So all this shit starts way before the actual pitch day. You got to rehearse out loud. I can't say this enough for people. So many founders is like, they sit at a laptop and they read their like go over their slide in their head, and then they stand up and expect to give a good performance. As you said, if we're thinking about it like acting, you're not going to, because you haven't simulated it in training. You haven't trained it. You got to rehearse it. You got to practice it. And so being on your feet and saying it out loud at full volume in many different ways across different iterations is really important. I have a ton of exercises I can give for how to do this. In my book, Transform Your Speaking Skills, I have a whole subchapter dedicated to my top 10 acting exercises for rehearsal, but I've got a ton of resources. Hopefully we can link to all this stuff
yeah, for sure.
under the podcast. So yeah, you've got to get it up on its feet, and you've got to say it out loud a bunch of times. The saying it out loud too, you'll also hear the sentences that don't make much sense or are clunky, right? Sometimes you've written a sentence or you've thought up a sentence, but until you hear yourself say it, you're like, oh, that doesn't make any sense, or that's really awkward to say. I can think of a better way to say that. So that's also helps you edit. Then ideally you do this 10 times out loud before you ever perform. Yeah. Most people do 2 or 3 max. Ideally, you do it 10 times. Again, when I was trying to get into theater school, I did it easily 100 before I auditioned. And then when you get to the day, you want to warm up. And I have a YouTube video for how to warm up that we can also link here. But basically, when you're warming up, you want to warm up your mind, you want to warm up your voice, you want to warm up your lips and your jaw and your tongue, your articulator muscles. You want to warm up your face muscles, like your eyebrows and your smiling muscles, so that those are engaged. And you want to warm up your breathing muscles so that you can breathe and calm down, but also breathe and take in oxygen for a nice, rich voice. So there's these elements that you really want to have warm when you're about to speak. So I have like exercises. You can do jumping jacks. You can do like bouncing and getting all your joints loose. We do exercise called big face, small face, where you go like this, and then you go like this, and you're just like working out your face muscles to warm those up. And we do, tongue twisters and all that stuff. And we do vocal exercises. So you go like, and you're just working on making your voice sound louder and richer and more, giving yourself more oxygen. And then you do breathing. You focus on deep belly breathing to make sure that you are settling your nervous system so you're not fucking terrified of going on stage in front of people, which most people are. It's doing that 15 minutes. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I guarantee most people definitely don't do that. Like, that is like a whole spectrum. And I actually just started questioning if I should be doing this before jumping on the podcast. Watching this video, like an exercise of warm up before we get on and start talking, because as you're saying it makes sense.
It's like, I try to tell people, like, just think of it like you were an athlete, right? No athlete would dream of going on the field without warming up, partly because they don't want to hurt themselves, but really they just want to optimize for performance. And it's the same thing with actors. No actor I've ever worked with, no matter how seasoned they are, they all warm up before going on stage. It's just, why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you get your face, your body, your voice, and your hands, and your mindset right? And it works wonders with stage fright. It just helps so much, because you're like, every time I have an opening night for a show, I'm having like a mini panic attack because I get such bad stage fright. And then I do my warm up, I do my breathing, I say some shit to myself, and then I have it at least under control. It's not like, I'm still nervous, but it's not crippling.
I want to talk about that stage fright bit, because and maybe this is a thing, maybe it's not a thing, so I'd love to get your opinion and perspective on it. I remember doing keynotes, and I would almost like do exactly what you're saying around prep the slides. I didn't warm up and do all that, but I had the slides, and I would just mentally get in my head before you go present. And I think those were probably like a 5 out of 10 on delivery. One of the things that helped me, and I don't know if this makes sense from an acting perspective or broadly, but now when I go and deliver a keynote or some larger presentation, I spend time, if I can, in advance of taking the stage, going around and meeting people and having actual casual conversations And it's
Yeah.
helped me, A, bring relatable stories from that day into the dialogue, and B, almost feel like I've got friends in the audience where when I say something or land a joke or I'm looking for someone to have a pause with, I'm making eye contact with people that now have some connection to me because we've talked, even if it was for 5 minutes before going on. Is that something that you see, or is it an acting trick, or does that weave into how people should be thinking about their pitches and on pitch day?
It does, and I think, this gets us also into the broader conversation of just like public speaking in general. So whether it's an investor pitch, whether you're doing a keynote, whether you're doing like a teaching workshop at a conference, but you're usually you're looking for clients or strategic partnerships when you take a gig like that, or you're doing a sales presentation or you're hosting a webinar for your company, like an educational / sales funnel webinar. All of those things, you want to go really well. I think where it diverges from acting is in the theater, we would never do that. You never go out and talk to the people beforehand because I don't know whether that's right or wrong, but it's just like, you don't do it. You keep yourself hidden, even if your friends are coming to the show, your family's coming to the show. You keep yourself hidden backstage. You don't interact with anyone when they come in the theater because you want them to believe you are the character who steps out there and you're not you. And that's a key difference between a keynote and acting. I don't need the audience to think I'm someone that I'm not when I'm giving a keynote. In fact, I would like as much as possible for them to really feel like they know who I am and they're seeing me. So that's why what you're talking about is so powerful. It's because like if you can create that sense of familiarity with a couple audience members, then you don't have to put on anything when you're up on stage. You don't have to be like, hey, everyone, you just be yourself, and it's easier to tap into that because you see friendly faces out there. What a good keynote should be, as we said, is teaching, not performance. So you want to tap into all those teaching skills that you need to hold somebody's attention. Because if I get up there and I'm like, hey, what's up? This is my topic. People won't listen because I don't sound enthusiastic. And they're like, well, if you don't give a shit, why should I care? But if I'm like, and the future of business is this, then they'll just be like, this isn't real. This is fake. This is inauthentic. And I also don't want to listen to that. So I call it finding your authentic stage presence, which is the perfect balance between like clear, loud, exciting delivery, but true to who you are and how you feel and how you normally talk as possible. They're kind of in tension, but if you can find the right balance, it creates something really powerful when you're delivering public speaking. Another trick I use that's like that for my own public speaking keynotes and workshops is I pretend, even if I haven't met anyone in the audience, that they're all my good acquaintances. So not good friends, because if they were my good friends, I'd be probably too inappropriate, but I pretend that they're like good acquaintances that I know that I like, but I'm not going to like say any racy jokes in front of, although I will say that the more I push that line, the more my audiences are well received. The less I really try to hide those goofy or maybe inappropriate aspects of my personality, I find people just receive it better. Because even if people are offended, I have a bunch of people come up to me after, be like, why do you have to swear so much? Or like, you use that word and whatever. And I just go, you know what? Fair enough. I'm just trying, but I am, it's more important for me to be authentic than for me to be universally tolerated.
Perfectly polished is
and
not
I think,
necessarily building the connection,
perfectly
right?
polished. I would much rather offend a few people and have the people who really appreciate authenticity, which is what I appreciate, resonate with it. And so, I really like that thing you said about familiarizing yourself with the audience and humanizing them for you and yourself for them.
So in that same vein, you talked about how pitches and presentations and keynotes are more of a teaching than an acting, because you are the character. Does this also, are you pro or against the approach where you find some way to survey the audience or land something where you give people the moment of pause? Like, when we're talking about the problem, I'm going to make one up off the top of my head. How many people in this audience drive a car and have ever been caught in the moment where the gas light's on and you have no idea where the nearest gas station is? Or you're in a car stuck in traffic and you've got to pee. Like, I don't know what the pitch is, but those surveys create this like, yeah, that's me. I felt
Yeah.
that pain. Are you
Yeah.
for building that into pitch, or do you think it kind of makes it weird? What are your thoughts?
I'm for it. Because I think it's audience engagement, and even if some people might find it cheesy, I see it time and time again. Whenever anybody does it, the audience is happy to be engaged, unless it's a stupid question, which like isn't worded properly, or sometimes you see somebody go up and they do it because they're not. They've written it, so they go, how many of you have been stuck in traffic and you have to pee? That's why I created this company. You know, it's like they don't give people time to raise their hand or answer. Yeah. But I'm for that. I'm for anything that creates a sense of the audience paying attention. I like to ask my audience rhetorical questions all the time and just pause. Because I know that if I'm just lecturing, there's a higher chance that people will tune out. But when I ask you a question, you hear that little inflection and you go, oh shit, am I being tested? Is he going to call on me? It's like you're back in school and you're like, you know, the teacher might call on me at any moment. So you have to pay attention because you don't want to be caught out as not listening. So the more you can do that in your pitch, even if you're not going to get people to raise their hands or shout out an answer, the more questions you ask your audience, and the more you ask them to do things like raise their hand. I ask my audience to stand up. I ask my audience to repeat after me. I do a whole bunch of shit because, I mean, my work is, I'm talking about this kind of public speaking stuff, but I'm all for audience participation. I think the audience appreciates it. Even when it's cheesy, they get into it, and it's just keeps their attention, makes it fun for them.
That makes sense. Like asking the audience right now if they've found some value in this discussion or if they want to hear a little bit more. So yes. on this, well, we've talked about like so many key pieces, and I think we've talked about some of the problems, some of the slideware piece, and a lot about the delivery. And I think that's probably the most overlooked piece is like the elements of delivery and practice. And the slide deck maybe ends up being less than 20 or 25% of this because the business is the business. So can you articulate it clearly? Are there any things that you have seen or experienced that you don't feel like we've really talked about yet that, you know, must grasp concepts that people need to be thinking about their pitch? I don't know if it's like something around what you see on the other side, because I imagine in the audience around the confidence that you come across with mattering, how you get funded, whether it's handling those tough questions and objections, which I imagine are also part of the pitch that aren't rehearsed, and how you deal with that, or some other thing of what investors are looking for that you don't feel like we've covered that we really need to tap into before we kind of tap up and close up the podcast.
Yeah, I would say Q&A is important to talk about, so I want to mention that in a second, but I usually break down my work into 3 separate pieces: story and telling and confidence. So we've talked about story, which is like, what do you include? What kind of words are you saying? How do you create that arc of a change? How do you superimpose your own story on the front of it to connect it to the reason why we're here talking about this? We've got the telling piece, which is like face, body, voice, hands, delivery, stage presence, way you communicate with the audience. And then we haven't really talked about the confidence piece other than, you know, handling a bit of stage fright. But confidence is not just stage fright or lack thereof. Confidence comes from a deep belief that you are a person worth listening to. And so surprisingly few people feel that they are worth listening to when I really dig and ask them, and when I talk to them. And I know that because they all come to me, or I talk to them, and I talk to people who want to work with me, and I talk to some people who I'm forced on because their accelerator hired me or their company hired me, you know? And so there's not just a survivorship bias of people who have sought out public speaking coaching. I work with a lot of people who never chose to work with me in the first place, but they end up opening up to me because of the nature of this work. It's so personal, the way you speak, the things you say, your personal story, right? That's so deep. And it's just, none of us get out of childhood unscathed. None of us have grown up without memories of humiliation and rejection and bullying and just all that shit. Like it just sits inside of us. And, you know, whether or not we're in therapy, and a lot of people aren't, there's no place for that stuff to go or get examined unless you're really working on it. And even then, there's so much to deal with that it's I've been in therapy 8 years. I'm still finding shit that I didn't realize is affecting me. And so the confidence for me is kind of looking at yourself from a compassionate perspective, and also from, I call it the best friend perspective. It's like, how do you talk to yourself? Well, you should talk to yourself like you would talk to a best friend that you really want to succeed. So instead of saying like, I'm a piece of shit, or this is going to go badly, or I'm not supposed to be here, or I don't belong here, you try to talk yourself up like you would talk to a best friend. Not being like, you're the best, because that's not a good friend either. But like, hey, you've worked hard. You've done your homework. You've spent years thinking about this topic and working really hard to get it to where it's at. And nobody else on earth has the same experience, education, life, background, family dynamic, all that stuff as you do. So you are an expert if you frame it right.
Yeah.
If you frame it as like, my story, my idea, my values, my philosophies, if you package all that, then you are a category of one. And nobody can fuck with you. Nobody can deny your right to be there, because there's nobody else who can replace you. So I think it's like a lot of kind of almost bordering on therapy work of like figuring out what makes you unique, what makes you interesting, and where is your value truly come from, not how much money you've raised or made for other people, but what makes you unique and valuable and interesting and different, and kind of owning that, embracing that, and then talking yourself up to be like, I deserve to be here. I deserve to be here, no more or no less than anyone else.
Sort of like breaking out of that imposter syndrome, right?
Totally. That's it. It's the imposter syndrome that I see in like, C-suite executives of massive companies, or like founders who have raised a ton of money. And they don't always have imposter syndrome about their work, but they have imposter syndrome about their public speaking. And that's really interesting to me, because it's like they can be so confident about their business, but they don't feel confident speaking about their business, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So maybe let's switch gears into this questions bit, because it feels like it's a thing we can't leave behind. And I imagine most people like they practice probably the top 3 that they think of, and they're just kind of looking forward and jogging the wheel in the back of their mind for, I prepped for this one. But I think question period and how you take in the question and think on the question and respond to the question probably has just as much bearing with the audience, correct?
Totally. Well, they're also seeing like, how are you doing without a script? And that is revealing of like your adaptability, your personality, because anyone can put on a performance for 3 to 5 minutes. But if under questioning you start to turn or change, so that's one thing I always say is, don't be different. Don't be a totally different person from your performance. Because some people go, thank you, and join us for the future of healthcare tech. And then it's like, and now the investors will ask some questions, and then they kind of go like this. And then the investor's like, so tell us about your business model in the book. So our business model, and then they're just completely different as a person and the way they're talking. So that creates
completely deflated.
Yeah, they're deflated, or they're just not the same person, which creates, again, that sense of mistrust. So just like you want your voice to match your words, to match your delivery while you're speaking, it should match it in the Q&A period, and then after if they come up and talk to you, and then at the bar later if they're having a drink, or the next phone call they get on with you. You want to be a real person, and you want to be consistent in terms of the way you talk. So if you're putting on a total performance for a pitch and then later they talk to you and you're different, they're just kind of like, do I trust this person? I don't know. It creates doubt. So be the same person, and also don't get defensive. I've seen that happen so many times. A founder will ask a very valid, reasonable question, or an investor or a panelist, and then the founder goes, well, actually, we thought about that. And, it's like, dude, just relax. It's not an attack. And even if it is, so what? Be polite, be respectful, and let them look like the asshole, even if they are being an asshole. And just say, oh, that's a good question. Well, actually, here's the answer. And, stay calm and respectful no matter what kind of energy you're getting from the questioner. And then the third piece is, it's okay to say, I don't know, but I'll find out for you. You don't have to have all the facts about your business in your head. Nobody does. So if you get asked a question you're not prepared for, if you can take a second and go, that's a really good question. I think it would be something like, and use some language like that to buy yourself a bit of time. And if nothing comes to you, you can say, to be honest, I don't want to give you just a made up answer. I'm going to look into it for you, and I'd love to send you an email and give you that later. And then that also creates an opportunity for a connection afterwards. You can get that investor's email and put them on your investor update list and stay connected with them, or so that's actually an opportunity. And people respect somebody who says, I don't know, but I'll find out for you.
It's a good one. One last thing, and I think you brought it up, is like some people, what's your thoughts? And maybe there's a better, you do want to create time sometimes to help yourself get in the right mindset to respond to a question. But some people almost make it a programmatic, thank you for your question, or that's a great question. How do you weave those in so that they don't just feel like every person that asks you a good question, it's a good question, and you're like, it wasn't even that good question, but like you're saying it, and the person actually looks a little weird saying thank you for your great question. Like, what are the segues that people could use?
So if you'll forgive me for this, I think this actually touches on a larger point that I want to address first, which is that it's your job as the speaker to be present with your audience or with anybody asking you a question. So that's a tricky thing to do. So if you hear a question and you don't think it's good, don't say that's a good question.
Yeah.
But if you do think it's a good question, then say something like that. But say it and mean it and really think. Basically, it's this concept of how do you mean what you say when you talk, and the only way to truly do that is to work on being present and thinking. Okay, how do I really feel in this moment? You know what? That question caught me by surprise. I have to be honest with you. I think I need to go and look at our data room to get that answer for you, but I'd love to take your email. Do you know what I mean? Like transparency, honesty, being present and thinking through. That'll stop you from just reverting to practice segues, which people can feel, as you said, are practice.
Like,
whatever you can
that's
do.
actually a really common question that we get. Here's the response. Or actually, you know what? I wasn't thinking of it in that way. And so the presence, I guess, is the most important part in staying engaged with your audience.
Presence and transparency. Like I love when people are radically honest on stage. It's funny. It's like if somebody goes, I have to be honest, I did not prepare for that question and it's a good one and thank you. Or just saying like, oh wow, that's great. I should probably know that. Or something throwing it away, making a joke out of it, and just being completely transparent about what you're going through in that moment is really, so many of us bullshit to try to impress people. And when we see somebody from a place of strength not bullshit and be honest about not having all the answers, not having everything together, not being prepared, that's refreshing. And people really, really respect that, I think. So I would say your job is to be like honest and transparent and just think like, how would I treat this? How would I treat this if I didn't want anything from this person? How would I talk to this VC if I didn't want their money? What would my voice sound like? What kind of language would I use if they were just a person that I was chatting with? And the more you tap into that, the better respect you tend to gain from those audiences, especially high status people. They're so used to people kissing their ass or being deferential or, and if you just talk to them like a normal person, they're so grateful that they'll like you.
It's a really good framing.
You know what I mean?
So totally makes sense because you're just framing it as like, just be honest, like take away the stakes and you will just act in the most authentic way. So if you just remove the stakes from what you're trying to do, it's hard. You have to separate it for a second. But if you separate the stakes from what you're trying to do, it's just be you. And people either bought into you or not bought into you. But if you bring a fake you, like what are you going to do after the pennies start flooding your bank account? Keep up the fake act? Like you got to be real. So it's really good.
To be real.
There's so much. Yeah, there's so much here. And you mentioned a few things, and we're gonna put them in the show notes. But as like, if there's one Uber thing where you're like, hey, this is where people can come to find out more because this conversation shouldn't stop here. And something that you're like, if there's one thing you took away from the last kind of almost hour that we've been talking, this is it. If you take away only one thing, this is it. And also here's where to kind of continue the journey. What would those be?
So the one thing in terms of what I want people to take away, or what I think they should hope they take away, is the idea that you have value because of your unique experience and your story and who you are as a person. So figure that out, what that is, and talk about it and show it with the way you speak. Tell your story, showcase your personality, your real personality, what you really care about, how you're passionate, and let people see it. So that is where your self-confidence should come from, not how many paid users you have, not how many successful exits you have before, but that unique story that you have in perspective. I like to cheesily rewrite the USP acronym for, instead of unique selling proposition, it's your unique story and perspective. And that's what you should cultivate. And then in terms of where to go to keep the conversation going, my LinkedIn is like my most active social media channel. That's where I post every day. I post something about public speaking, storytelling, and communication skills for entrepreneurs. And I also try to be really active in the DMs there and in the comments. So if people are like, hey, I've got this question, or what do you think about this? I try to answer those as fast as I can, and for, obviously for free, and as much as I try to be just as helpful and engaged there as I can. So they can find me at Will Greenblatt on LinkedIn. And then I have my newsletter there. I have my book there. So if they're interested in like reading more about this stuff and these methods and these stories, they can get my book. They can check out my book there, or they can join my weekly newsletter where I do kind of like one deep dive on one of these topics every week, whatever people are struggling with that I'm hearing, or whatever is going to help people tell their story more confidently, more clearly. Yeah. The greenblast.com, I think, is the newsletter.
We'll make sure it's linked regardless in the show notes.
Cool.
Will, this has been like a really good conversation. I've learned a ton. I think I'm going to be like small face, big face, small face, big face before future podcasts. If anyone was wondering why my face is twitching there.
Yeah.
I think this has been super educational. Obviously, we talked elevator pitch to exit and crafting pitches that get you funded. I'm glad we spent the majority of time today on the thing that probably is overlooked, which is the delivery. All this time is spent on the perfect 10 slides, but very little time, or far less time, is spent on the delivery and preparing yourself and showing up, not just for the pitch, but for everything around it, as a founder, as a consultant, as a presenter, and super important stuff. So I hope people got a lot of value out of today's session. I did. And so thank you for making the time to come on today. That's what these rocket fuels are all about. They're for founders, for builders, for people working at startups. And this is highly relevant to any of those people. So thank you for coming on to the show today, Will.
Thanks, Mike. It was really, really fun to talk to you.
Awesome. For everyone else, make sure you subscribe, follow us for the next one, and we'll catch you on the next episode. Have a great day.